Here are 25 everyday nouns in Spanish that you need to know. Número uno, la casa, just meaning the house. If you want to talk about home, right, my home, you can say mi casa or you can say mi hogar, okay? Número dos, la mesa, the table, just meaning table. No fancy translations there. Next, la silla, the chair. So, ahora mismo, yo estoy sentado en una silla. ¿Te gusta sentarte en sillas? A mí sí me gusta. Número 4, la puerta. The door, right? Ve y sal de la puerta. Leave and go out the door. Sal de la puerta. La ventana. Hay luz que entra por la ventana. Also, in Spanish, we have the funny phrase, tirar la casa por la ventana. Literally, throw the house out the window, which just means when you spend a lot of money. If you're in Mexico and you want to refer to money, you can do this. This just means money. So, no manches, ayer fui al centro comercial y tiré la casa por la ventana. I threw the house out the window. Okay? Next, clothes and objects. La camisa, meaning shirt. Now, camisa is this kind of shirt, what I'm wearing now, a collared shirt. If you want to say a regular t-shirt, you can say la camiseta for a regular t-shirt. Or in Mexico, we also have the word, excuse me, I'm getting used to my new kind of filming setup with this iPad. We also have the word la playera, which is also what we can say here in Mexico for shirt, okay? Los pantalones, meaning pants or the pants. We can also, when referring to jeans, call them jeans. A mí me gustan tus jeans. O podemos decir, me gustan tus pantalones de mezclilla. Me gustan tus pantalones de mezclilla. Okay, that would be jeans. Okay? Los zapatos, meaning shoes. Oye, amigo, a mí me encantan tus zapatos. Son chidos. Tus zapatos son chidos. We can also say tenis, which would be tennis shoes. So, oye, compa, me gustan tus tenis, right? I like your tennis shoes, okay? Número 9, la mochila, meaning the backpack, la mochila. Cuando era niño, yo iba a la escuela con mi mochila. I used to go to my school with my backpack. El teléfono, meaning phone, okay? Te voy a llamar por teléfono. I'm going to call you by the phone. We can also say el celular, okay? Meaning the cell phone, okay? El celular. In Spain, you might also hear something like el móvil, okay? In Mexico, it's more common that we use teléfono or celular, okay? All right, now for food and kitchen. Número 11. El plato, the plate. Ahora, el plato también puede significar the dish. Okay, so for example, mi plato favorito es blah, blah, blah. So my favorite dish is so on and so forth. You can also, in Mexico, make it cute and you can call it platillo. Okay, ¿cuál platillo vas a pedir? What dish are you going to order? Okay. El vaso, meaning the glass that you drink out of. We also have la taza, which would be a cup. Think of like what you drink tea out of, right? Oh, voy a tomar té de mi taza favorita, for example. Now, you might think that el vaso sounds like vase. However, in Mexico, for vase, we will say I wrote it wrong, florero. There we go. El florero, okay? Literally the flowerer, but it just means the vase, okay? All right, número 13, el tenedor, meaning the fork, okay? Oye, pásame el tenedor, por favor. Hey, hand me that fork, please. Now, in Mexico, we can also use even more informal commands, which would be something like this. So, the first one that I said was this, pásame, okay? Meaning pass me the fork. Whereas in Mexico, you could also say something like this, for example, me pasas. Okay, it's an even more passive way to command someone to do something. So, oye, me pasas un tenedor, por favor. Hey, could you pass me a fork, please? That's why when we talk about ordering food in Spanish, when we order food in Mexico, for example, it's very common that we will say something like me da or me das. So for example, this is the informal command, and you might have heard this before. Dame, okay? I can tell you, dame un taco, give me a taco, or I could say, deme un taco, which would be the formal usted command, okay? So these two are technical commands that we have in Spanish. However, in Mexico, we can also do this kind of more passive way to command someone to do something. So we have me da and me das, okay? So we have dame, give me, that's an informal tú command. Deme, give me, a formal usted command. And now we have me da. So me da is actually coming from usted, okay? Me representing me, and da coming from usted, right? Usted da. Usted me da unos tacos. So, me da 5 tacos, por favor. Give me 5 tacos, please. Whereas me das would just be coming from tú, okay? So it's a little bit more informal. However, these two right here are the most polite way to order in Mexico, which might sound a little weird and it might sound a little bit forward. Oh, give me. But this is the most common way to order, okay? So you could say dame or deme, totally fine, but the best way is me da or me das, okay? All right, número 14, la cuchara, meaning the spoon. Entonces, yo como sopa con una cuchara. I eat soup with a spoon. And número 15, el cuchillo, meaning the knife, okay? Voy a cortar el bistec con mi cuchillo. I'm going to cut the steak with my knife, okay? Now, what about getting around town? Well, of course, we have la palabra el coche, meaning the car, and I'm sure you've heard of this in Mexico. We also have el carro. Now, there are other words that we can use. For example, el auto, or you can even say automóvil, for example. I believe the accent goes there, okay? Those are a few different ways. In Mexico, the most common one is going to be el carro. However, el coche is also used. Now, some interesting ones that we have can also be el camión, which would be for a bus. That was the weirdest M ever. This is an M. We also have the truck, okay, which would be this, la camioneta. Now, in the United States, sometimes you might hear native Spanish speakers or Spanish speakers who grew up in the States say something like la troca, which is totally coming from English. I said this word, la troca, to my Mexican girlfriend from Mexico City. She did not know what it was, okay? So be careful of words like la troca, or another common one that we have is el lonche, okay? El lonche, meaning lunch, in the north of Mexico, you might hear this, or in the United States, but the proper way to say lunch in Mexico would actually be la comida, literally meaning the food, but it also means lunch. And of course, you may have heard the word for lunch as el almuerzo, okay? So, el almuerzo, la comida, both of those work here in Mexico. But let's say you go to somewhere like Chile or España, then just use the word el almuerzo. That's the widely accepted word for lunch, okay? Don't say lonche, okay? So, troca meaning truck, but the best word is camioneta. Camión meaning a bus, can also be like a trailer. However, in Mexico, you'll probably hear this, el trailer, for a trailer. Okay? Then we have el carro, el auto, or el automóvil. Okay? Número 17, la calle, the street. Okay? We also have the word la avenida, for example, the avenue. Or you might hear people say, it's the same, boulevard. It's the same. Okay? La calle, boulevard, la avenida. Okay? Next, la tienda, for the store. Now, in a place like Mexico, we have many different specialized stores. So maybe I'll say to you, la carnicería, for example, which is the butcher. Or what about la panadería? Panadería, I believe that's how it's written. And a funny one, what about a place where they sell cheeses? Quesería. This is a funny kind of little joke in Spanish. Did you get that? Quesería meaning what would it be, okay? So, but it sounds like it could be a quesería, right? Panadería, carnicería. And of course, in Mexico, arguably the most important out of all of these is going to be la tortillería. Of course, very important, okay? All right, so there you go. Okay. Número 19, el parque, just meaning the park. Número 20, el banco, meaning the bank. And what about this? La banca. Do you know what that means? La banca means bench, okay? Un banco can also be a stool. So banco can be bank or stool, and la banca will be a bench, okay? And finally, common things that we're going to use. So for example, el reloj. It's weird because the word reloj kind of sounds like a K when native Spanish speakers say it, especially here in Mexico. They might sound kind of like they're saying el reloj. So, me gusta tu reloj, all right? But you can also say el reloj, okay? Kind of just ends after the O there, okay? El reloj, okay? Número 22, la llave, okay? La llave, okay? We can also use the word la clave, which can also be translated as key, but it's more so like a password, okay? Llave would be a physical key, whereas la clave would be kind of like a password key, okay? El dinero, meaning money or the money. Now, let's think of some slang for money. We have la lana, for example, that we can say in Mexico. La lana, literally meaning wool. Or we could say something like la feria as well, literally meaning fair, but in this case, it just means money. Computadora, meaning computer. You might also hear something like el portátil, which would be a laptop computer. El portátil, like that. And then finally we have el libro, just meaning the book. Bueno, there you have it. Before you go, make sure to click the link in the video description to check out our Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy, or you can just go to SpanishWithNate.com. Our goal is to help you have a 10-minute conversation in Spanish in 90 days without feeling unconfident. So check it out by clicking the link in the video description, or you can just Google SpanishWithNate.com. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.